Barbara Evans, an 82-year-old widow, lives in constant torment under the iron fist of Angela Davis, her manipulative daughter-in-law, who has turned her home into a living nightmare. After months of cruelty, Angela finally threatens to send her away to a distant nursing home unless Barbara signs over everything she owns. But Angela has no idea Barbara is no longer defenseless. With her neighbor Laura's help, everything has been recorded. Every cruelty, every horror. Angela thought she had control. But the truth is about to be unleashed. Want to know what happened? Watch until the end and don't miss this story full of emotions and unexpected twists. Also, tell us where you're watching from, write it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more thrilling stories like this. Barbara Evans sat alone in the dimly lit living room, her hands trembling as she clutched a faded photograph. The once warm and welcoming house now felt like a prison, stripped of its charm and filled with an eerie silence. The piano, which used to sing with the melodies her late husband composed, was now covered with a dusty cloth, untouched for years. Barbara's heart ached at the memories of laughter and music that once echoed through these walls. She looked around, noticing how bare the shelves were. Family heirlooms and cherished possessions had vanished, sold off piece by piece by her daughter-in-law Angela. Barbara's once proud home had become nothing more than an empty shell, reflecting her own loneliness. It was hard to believe how quickly everything had changed. Her son Paul had always been a good man, kind, caring, and devoted to his family. But ever since he married Angela, it was as if his eyes had been clouded by love or perhaps manipulated by charm. Angela had a way of making herself seem perfect, always sweet and graceful around Paul, but a cold, calculating predator when they were alone. Barbara learned to stay silent, fearing Angela's wrath and knowing that her son would never believe her. Angela's control over the house was absolute. She dictated every aspect of Barbara's life, from what she ate to when she could leave her room. Most days Barbara sat quietly, afraid to make a sound, hoping not to provoke Angela's temper. It seemed that every little thing set her off, a cup out of place, a misplaced sweater, each mistake met with cruel words and threats. The most terrifying threat of all was Angela's constant warning. "One more slip-up, old lady, and I'll ship you off to the nursing home." Barbara couldn't bear the thought of leaving her home, the place where she had built a life with her husband and raised Paul. The fear of being sent away was like a weight on her chest, suffocating and inescapable. Yet deep down, a small spark of hope remained, a quiet belief that someone might notice her suffering and reach out a hand. One evening, as Barbara sat by the window, lost in her thoughts, she saw Laura Reed, her neighbor, walking by. Laura waved, offering a warm smile that Barbara couldn't help but return. For a fleeting moment, Barbara felt seen, like a human being again. Little did she know that Laura's simple act of kindness would soon become the lifeline that would change everything. Laura Reed had always been the kind of woman who couldn't turn a blind eye to suffering. As a social worker for over 20 years, her instincts were sharp, her empathy stronger than most, and for months now she'd sensed something was wrong with her elderly neighbor. It was the little things that didn't sit right. Barbara used to be so lively, always tending to her garden or chatting with passers-by from her porch. But over time, Laura noticed the change. Barbara had become reclusive, her figure pale and frail whenever she appeared outside. Even her eyes, once vibrant with life, seemed hollow and defeated. Laura's concern deepened one evening when she walked past Barbara's house, her arms full of groceries. She had paused by the mailbox, checking her own letters, when she heard muffled sobbing coming from inside the house, followed by a vicious, snarling voice. "I told you to stay out of the kitchen, you useless old woman." The voice was sharp and merciless. "Do you want me to lock you in your room again?" Laura's chest tightened, a sickening twist of anger and helplessness roiling in her stomach. She couldn't imagine someone speaking to anyone that way, much less an elderly woman who clearly had nowhere else to go. Her fingers clenched around the handles of her grocery bags, her mind racing with what she should do, but she couldn't just barge in. She needed to be smart about this. Angela Davis, Barbara's daughter-in-law, was known around the neighborhood as charming and polite. No one would believe the cruelty Laura had just overheard, and if she confronted Angela without proof, she feared Barbara's life would only become more miserable. Laura decided to try a gentler approach. The next morning, she baked a batch of oatmeal cookies, her grandmother's recipe, and carried them over to Barbara's house, with a forced air of casualness. She rang the doorbell, her heart thudding in her chest. It was Angela who opened the door, her smile wide and saccharine, her eyes cold and calculating. "Good morning, Laura," Angela cooed with fake enthusiasm. "What a pleasant surprise. To what do I owe this visit?" "I just made some cookies and thought Barbara might like to try some," Laura replied, her voice steady. Angela's smile flickered, the mask slipping for just a moment. "Oh, that's so sweet of you. But Barbara isn't feeling well today. You know, her age and all. Maybe I could just drop them off with her," Laura pressed, her gaze steady. "I haven't seen her in weeks." Angela's eyes narrowed, suspicion evident in her expression. "Like I said, she's not well, but I'll make sure she gets them. Thanks, Laura." With that, Angela took the cookies and closed the door before Laura could even reply. Laura stared at the closed door, frustration simmering beneath her calm exterior. If Angela thought that would stop her, she was terribly mistaken. Because Laura had already made up her mind. Whatever was happening inside that house, she was going to find out. And she was going to help Barbara, no matter what it took. Barbara's days continued to pass in a haze of loneliness and cruelty. Angela had become more oppressive, her demeanor growing colder as she expanded her control over the house. Barbara's treasured possessions, paintings her husband once adored, the antique vase her mother had gifted her decades ago, were sold off like they meant nothing. Paul's visits became increasingly rare. Whenever he came by, Angela would make sure Barbara was too weak or too upset to speak freely. On the few occasions they shared a moment alone, Angela's presence loomed over them, her voice interrupting like a dagger cutting through the air. "She's not well today, Paul. She doesn't even remember what day it is." And Paul believed her. The doubt in his eyes was worse than any of Angela's insults. It was as if the son Barbara had raised with so much love had vanished behind a veil of deceit. But despite the darkness, something remarkable began to happen. Laura, the friendly neighbor with soft, encouraging eyes, grew more persistent in her attempts to make contact. Barbara would often catch her glancing with concern through the window, her expression a mixture of curiosity and worry. One particular afternoon, Laura came by, pretending to deliver a misplaced piece of mail. Angela intercepted her at the door, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "The old lady's resting. She doesn't need company, thank you very much." And then the door was slammed shut. But Laura was undeterred. Over the next few weeks, she would find small ways to make her presence known. A loaf of freshly baked bread left on the porch. A carefully folded note slipped through the mail slot with the words, "If you need anything, I'm just next door. Don't hesitate to reach out." Angela sneered at every gesture, tossing the bread into the trash, tearing up the notes with glee. But Barbara saw each act of kindness, and they brought her a sliver of comfort. A quiet, steady hope started growing inside her. On one rare morning when Angela was out shopping, Barbara made her way to the window. She gazed longingly at Laura's house, her trembling fingers tracing the cold glass as if somehow she could reach out and be heard. But she was too afraid. Days turned into weeks, and still Barbara said nothing. She feared that if she tried to ask for help, Angela would find out and punish her in ways she couldn't even imagine. But the kindness from Laura was like water to a wilting flower. Barbara found herself looking forward to those tiny gestures. They were reminders that not everyone was cruel, and maybe, just maybe, she had a chance to be saved. Laura's hands trembled slightly as she held the small voice recorder in her palm. The device was simple, just a tiny piece of plastic and metal, but it carried the potential to change everything. She had spent days researching, making sure to pick something Barbara could easily use. Now, she just needed to convince Barbara to take the risk. It was a Sunday afternoon when Laura knocked on Barbara's door. Angela was out running errands, her voice having trailed off in a nasty grumble as she stormed out of the house. Laura knew her time was limited. Barbara answered the door with cautious eyes, her frail body appearing even smaller against the doorway. But when she saw Laura, her expression softened, as if some of the fear and pain she held so tightly dissolved in that moment of kindness. "Come in, dear, before she gets back," Barbara whispered, her voice trembling. Laura stepped inside, her gaze sweeping the room for any signs of trouble. The living room was almost bare now, stripped of the warmth and memories Barbara had once cherished. Whatever hadn't been sold had been stashed away in some forgotten corner. "Barbara, I brought something for you," Laura began, her tone gentle but urgent. She held out the recorder. It's a voice recorder. It's simple to use. You just press this button to record and this one to stop. It fits right in your pocket and you can hide it anywhere." Barbara's eyes widened with a mix of fear and curiosity. You want me to record her? But what if she finds out?" "That's why you have to be careful." "But Barbara, if we're going to prove what Angela's been doing to you, we need evidence. This is the best way to show Paul the truth. And I'll be here every step of the way. You're not alone," Laura assured her, squeezing her hand. Barbara's gaze lowered to the recorder, her fingers trembling as she took it. "I'll try. I can't go on like this, not anymore." Encouraged by Barbara's bravery, Laura continued, "There's something else. I've set up a couple of small cameras facing the front porch and the backyard. If Angela ever tries anything outside, we'll catch her. And if things get worse, I'll call the authorities." Barbara's eyes glistened with tears. It was the first glimmer of hope she had felt in months. "Thank you, Laura. You're an angel. I don't know what I'd do without you." Laura smiled, her expression filled with determination. "You won't have to find out. This nightmare is going to end, I promise." Barbara hugged Laura, her frail arms holding on as if her very life depended on it. And in a way, it did. For the first time in a long while, Barbara felt like she had a fighting chance. The fight had only just begun, but the seed of hope had been planted, and Laura would do whatever it took to see that hope flourish. It had been a week since Barbara hid the small voice recorder Laura had given her. Angela's outbursts continued, each one captured with dreadful clarity. Barbara trembled each time she pressed the record button, but the thought of freedom, of justice, kept her going. Laura's surveillance cameras, discreetly installed facing the porch and the driveway, were already gathering evidence of Angela's menacing behavior. But the most alarming revelation came from Laura's own research. The name Angela Davis returned no troubling past. But the woman's features, those cold, calculating eyes, stirred something in Laura's memory. She spent hours digging through old case files and criminal reports. It wasn't until she stumbled upon an unsolved case from 8 years ago that her breath caught in her chest. A woman named Nicole Flores had been on the run, wanted for a series of high-profile frauds and an attempted murder in Mexico. After swindling millions from trusting investors through a fraudulent real estate scheme, she had attempted to eliminate a business partner, a woman named Patricia Morales, who had discovered the truth. Patricia survived the attack, but remained in hiding ever since. According to reports, Nicole had fled Mexico and seemingly vanished without a trace. Her description was chillingly close to Angela's. The slight accent Angela sometimes failed to hide, her reluctance to speak about her past, her obsession with money and control, everything added up. Laura's heart pounded as she printed out every article, every report she could find. This wasn't just a case of elder abuse. Angela was a dangerous criminal hiding in plain sight, and Barbara was living under the same roof as her. Laura immediately tried to contact Paul, but her calls went unanswered. She had to approach him with undeniable proof, and she had to do it fast, before Angela grew suspicious of Barbara's newfound courage. Meanwhile, Barbara kept pressing that tiny button every time Angela lashed out, her trembling fingers clutching the device like a lifeline. She had no idea the true extent of the danger she was facing, but the truth was closer to being exposed than Angela could ever imagine. Laura paced her living room, her hands shaking as she clutched the stack of printed reports. The weight of the discovery was almost too much to bear. Angela Davis was indeed Nicole Flores, a dangerous con artist who had fled Mexico under the guise of a new identity. And here she was, living comfortably in the suburbs, pretending to be the loving wife of Paul Evans, while slowly destroying his mother's life. Knowing she had no time to waste, Laura dialed Paul's number again. This time, he picked up, his voice gruff and impatient. "What is it, Laura? I'm busy." Paul, you need to listen to me. It's about Angela, and it's serious. Laura's tone was urgent, her voice trembling with intensity. Paul let out a frustrated sigh. Laura, if this is another attempt to convince me Angela is mistreating my mother— It's not just that, Laura interrupted, her voice rising. I've found something you need to see. It's about who Angela really is. Please, just give me 10 minutes of your time. That's all I ask. There was a long, painful silence on the other end. Finally, Paul agreed to meet her at a nearby coffee shop. When they sat down, Laura laid out the documents one by one. Her hands moved quickly, presenting every piece of evidence with a clarity only born from desperation. The photos, the articles, the reports detailing the frauds and the attempted murder— it was all there. Paul's eyes scanned the papers, his face growing pale as the truth unfolded before him. His hands shook as he read Nicole Flores' name over and over again. The resemblance was undeniable. The past Angela had conveniently avoided talking about now made sense. And the fury in her eyes every time Barbara dared to speak up— he understood now why she needed control so desperately. But this can't be real, Paul whispered, his voice cracking. Angela, Nicole, she told me her family was from Texas, that she came from nothing, built herself up. It's all been a lie. All of it, Laura confirmed, her voice steady. And Barbara is her prisoner. Paul, your mother is in real danger. And if Angela realizes we're onto her— Paul's eyes snapped up, fear mingling with guilt. We need proof, real proof, not just these articles, something solid. Laura reached into her purse and pulled out the voice recorder she had given Barbara. Your mother's been recording her, and I have security cameras facing the house. It's not enough to catch her criminal past, but it's enough to show the abuse. We need to get those recordings and catch her in the act. Paul nodded, his expression hardening. Then we do it, whatever it takes. Angela's paranoia had reached its peak. The subtle changes in Barbara's demeanor were unsettling. She could sense Barbara's newfound courage, something that made Angela's skin crawl. It was as if the frail old woman was preparing for something, and Angela didn't like surprises. One evening after Paul left the house, Angela's fury exploded. She slammed Barbara's door open and stormed in, her eyes blazing with unfiltered rage. What have you been doing, you old hag? Whispering secrets to your little social worker. Friend, Angela snarled, her voice low and dripping with venom. Barbara's hands trembled slightly, but she held her gaze steady. I'm just trying to survive, Angela. You've left me with nothing but scraps. Survive? Angela scoffed. You won't even have that if you don't sign over everything to me. And don't think I don't notice your little schemes, the way you whisper to Laura like she's some sort of savior. But she can't help you, Barbara. Nobody can. Angela's cruelty was sharper than ever, her words cutting like knives. Barbara could feel her heart pounding, but she remained calm. Laura's words replayed in her mind. Stay strong, the truth will come out. Angela continued to lash out, her words growing more vicious by the minute. But this time, Barbara wasn't just a helpless victim. The small recorder Laura had given her was safely tucked away in her cardigan pocket, capturing every poisonous word. Angela's tirade continued for what felt like hours, her desperation evident. She ranted about her plans to ship Barbara off to a nursing home, far away from anyone who might care enough to ask questions. But just when Barbara thought Angela's hatred had reached its peak, the doorbell rang. Angela's head snapped up, her expression turning to panic. Who the hell is that? She hissed, her eyes darting towards the hallway. Barbara's expression remained impassive. Why don't you go and find out? Angela stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. Barbara let out a shaky breath, her fingers gripping the edge of the bed. From the other side of the door, muffled voices echoed through the house. Barbara strained to listen, her heart pounding. It was Paul and Laura. Their voices were firm, insistent, but Angela's responses were sharp and defensive. Barbara could feel the power dynamic shifting. Angela was losing control, and she knew it. The truth was inching closer, and for the first time in years, Barbara felt a flicker of hope that the nightmare might finally end. Angela stormed down the hallway, her steps echoing through the house like gunshots. The moment she reached the door and flung it open, her rage faltered, her eyes widening with panic. Paul and Laura stood on the doorstep, both wearing expressions of cold determination. Paul's face was pale, his fists clenched at his sides as he glared at his wife. "What the hell are you doing here?" Angela snapped, her voice trembling with fury and fear. "We need to talk," Paul said, his voice firm but hollow. "Now." Angela crossed her arms over her chest, trying to reclaim her composure. "I told you, Paul, your mother is a danger to herself. I've been doing everything I can to care for her." "Save it," Laura cut in, her eyes blazing with fury. "We know the truth, Angela. Barbara told me everything, and she's recorded every word of your abuse." Angela's face went pale. Her lips quivered as she stammered, "Recorded? You're lying. That old witch is just trying to turn you against me." Paul's gaze never wavered. "The only liar here is you, Angela. You think I'd just take your word for everything while you treat my mother like a prisoner in her own home?" Angela's breathing quickened, panic flashing across her face. "Paul, you have to understand, she's been manipulating you. She's sick and delusional. You can't trust anything she says." "I trusted you, and you betrayed that trust in the worst way imaginable," Paul said, his voice cracking. "You were supposed to care for her, Angela. Instead, you've been tormenting her, using her weakness to line your own pockets." Angela's mask of arrogance crumbled, her eyes darting between Paul and Laura, looking for a way out. But there was none. The truth was out, and there was no escaping it. "You've been lying to me for years, making me believe my own mother was losing her mind. All because of your greed," Paul continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. "It's over, Angela, you're done." Angela's shoulders sagged, her defiance reduced to a flicker of desperation. "Paul, please. I only did it for us, for our future. I made mistakes, but I can change." "It's too late for that," Paul said, his expression hardened. "You need to leave." Angela stared at him, her eyes wide with terror. But as Paul's glare remained steady, she realized her grip over him was finally broken. The sound of her own shallow breathing was the only thing Angela could hear as she stumbled away from the house, leaving Barbara's life for good. But Barbara knew this wasn't the end. Not yet. The legal battle was just beginning, and Angela's dark past was about to catch up with her. Angela's heart pounded in her chest as Paul and Laura's words echoed through her mind. They knew. They had uncovered the truth, her real identity. Nicole Flores, the woman who had fled Mexico years ago, leaving behind a life of deception, crime, and betrayal. She had come to the United States to start over, using a new name, a new face, a new life, and she had succeeded. Until now. Angela paced the living room, her fingers trembling as she tried to formulate a plan. Panic swirled within her, and her thoughts were scattered like leaves in a storm. But even as desperation clawed at her, a sliver of her old calculating self emerged. If Paul and Laura were willing to confront her like this, it meant they had proof. And if they had proof, it was only a matter of time before everything crumbled. She needed to act fast. She marched toward Barbara's room, her expression twisted with a mixture of fury and fear. Barbara was sitting on her bed, her frail shoulders straight, her gaze unwavering. Somehow, Angela's anger didn't seem to frighten her anymore, and that infuriated Angela even more. "So this is your big plan, huh?" Angela hissed, her voice low and sharp. "You and that meddling social worker think you can just ruin my life?" Barbara's eyes narrowed, the pain of the past replaced by a quiet strength. "You ruined your own life, Angela. You can blame me all you want, but deep down you know that's the truth." Angela's eyes blazed. "You have no idea what I've been through. I had to leave everything behind, escape from people who wanted me dead. I had no choice." "No choice?" Barbara echoed, her voice trembling with anger. "You always had a choice. But instead of making things right, you chose to hurt people. To hurt me." Angela took a step forward, her fists clenched. "You don't understand. You can't understand. And yet, here you are," Barbara continued, her tone firm. "Still trying to control everything, still using fear to get what you want." Angela's expression faltered, her arrogance crumbling. The woman she had tried to break was now looking at her with something far worse than anger. Pity. From Behind Angela, Paul's voice cut through the tension like a knife. "It's over, Angela. Or should I say, Nicole?" Angela's head whipped around, her eyes locking onto Paul. His face was pale, his expression both devastated and resolute. Laura stood by his side, her arms folded tightly, her gaze icy. "I looked into your past," Paul said, his voice trembling with betrayal. "Your real past. The fraud, the crimes, everything you ran away from. And then you came here pretending to be someone else just so you could take advantage of my family, take advantage of my mother." Angela opened her mouth to protest, but no words came out. Her lies had unraveled completely. Her power over them was gone. "It's over," Laura repeated, her voice firm. "You have nowhere left to run." Angela's knees buckled, and she stumbled backward, her once unshakable confidence shattered. Everything she had built was crumbling around her, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Angela's expression twisted into something feral, her panic turning into unhinged desperation. She stumbled backward, her eyes wild and unfocused. It was clear that her world was crumbling, and she had nothing left to lose. "If I can't have this house, then no one will," Angela shrieked, storming toward the living room with frightening determination. Paul and Laura exchanged a horrified glance before racing after her, but Angela was faster, already pouring lighter fluid over the carpet and tossing pillows and papers onto the floor to create a pyre. "Angela, stop!" Paul shouted, his voice breaking. "What the hell are you doing?" Angela's hands shook, but her madness kept her moving. "If I'm going down, I'm taking all of you with me. You'll never see me rot in some filthy prison." Laura reached for her phone, her trembling fingers dialing 911 as fast as she could. Meanwhile, Paul tried to approach Angela, his hands raised in a desperate attempt to calm her down. "Angela, this is insane. You're only making things worse. You can still walk away from this with some dignity if you just stop." "Dignity?" Angela's laugh was like shattered glass. "I haven't had dignity since the day I was forced to flee. You think you're some kind of hero, Paul. You're nothing. Just another fool who let himself be played." With a crazed glare, Angela pulled a box of matches from her pocket, her thumb striking the first one with ruthless determination. The tiny flame danced between her fingers, its glow flickering against her frantic eyes. "No, Angela? Please." Barbara's voice cracked as she cried out from behind Paul. Her frail body shook, but her voice was steady. "Don't do this." For a moment something broke in Angela's gaze, but it wasn't enough. She dropped the match. Fire roared to life, the flames greedily licking up the soaked carpet. Smoke billowed into the air, choking the room with its acrid stench. Paul grabbed Barbara's arm, guiding her toward the front door. "We need to get out of here, now," he yelled. Laura stayed on the phone with the emergency operator, her eyes wide as she stumbled outside with them. The fire spread, quickly devouring everything in its path. Hand through the haze of smoke and heat, they could see Angela standing still. Her eyes glazed over as if she'd already accepted her fate. But before the fire could consume her, sirens blared from the street. Firefighters and police officers swarmed the property, pulling Angela out of the inferno before it was too late. Angela's arrest was swift and merciless. The woman who had terrorized Barbara for so long was finally taken away, her screams lost beneath the wail of sirens and the crackle of dying flames. Barbara and Paul sat on the curb, their lungs burning from the smoke, but their hearts pounding with relief. The nightmare was over. Laura placed a comforting hand on Barbara's shoulder. "It's finally over. You're safe now." Tears slipped down Barbara's cheeks, but this time they were tears of liberation. "I am. Thanks to both of you." Paul held his mother's hand tightly, his voice heavy with remorse. "I'll never let anything happen to you again, Mom, I swear." Barbara nodded, her gaze steady and full of gratitude. She had survived, and now she was free to rebuild her life, with her son by her side. Months had passed since that horrifying night. Barbara's home, once a place of torment, had been lovingly restored with Paul's care and devotion. The scent of fresh paint and blooming flowers now filled the air, replacing the bitterness of the past. Paul visited Barbara daily, their bond growing stronger with each passing moment. The guilt he once carried was slowly replaced by gratitude and warmth. He listened to her stories, laughed at her jokes, and held her hand during their quiet moments together. Laura remained a cherished friend, her visits a source of light for Barbara's newfound peace, and as Barbara sat by the window one sunny afternoon, the sound of children's laughter drifting through the air, she allowed herself to smile, truly smile, because she had found her way back to happiness, and this time it was here to stay.